The mission of the UC Center for Business Analytics is to connect, teach, learn about, and promote the application of business analytics and AI through a community of industry and academic experts. The center executes this mission through a range of trainings, engagements, and events. And one of the center's big annual events is fast approaching, the Analytics Summit. The 2025 Analytics Summit will be held May 6th at the Sharonville Convention Center in Cincinnati. This year's theme is Follow the Money. The summit includes 4 keynote speakers, 15 breakout sessions, and a networking reception. On this episode of Bearcats Mean Business, Center for Business Analytics Executive Director Tim Cholvat is joined by Todd James, a seasoned C-suite technology executive, board member, senior advisor, and business unit leader who is now the founder and CEO of Aurora Insights. Tim and Todd are here to discuss the Analytics Summit, where Todd will host a talk entitled Unlocking Business Potential with AI, Insights from Industry Leaders. Take it away, Tim and Todd.
Hello, Todd. Great to have you here today.
Likewise. Glad to be here, Tim. Thanks to have me.
We're excited to have you as a speaker in the industry alignment track at the Analytics Summit this year. Can you please tell us a bit about your background, why you chose the title Unlocking Business Potential with AI, Insights from Industry Leaders for your talk?
Happy to. I'll start with the background. Throughout my career, and it's a really interesting time that we're in now, I've always kind of operated at the intersection of business and technology. So I've had business roles where I'm leveraging technology to support my P&L, to support my function. But I've also led technology business units as a CDO and a CTO at large organizations. So, and from a progression, I've had large roles at Fidelity Investments where I helped them build out their AI journey, leading and building out global analytics capabilities for that company, as well as at 8451 in Kroger, where I was Chief Data and Technology Officer for 8451, and I led the AI agenda and enterprise data for Kroger. So had an opportunity to see hands-on and stand accountable for analytics advancement within some very large firms. The reason I chose this talk is we're at a pivotal moment. We're at a once-in-a-lifetime global re-platforming event that's going to be transformative for business. And in a lot of cases, it's talked about from a technology angle. And it gives the impression that it's technology-led, when in reality it's technology-enabled. So what I want to have in this discussion is a candid dialogue with the attendees at the conference where I can share and we can have a discussion around what are those things that the business needs to do to be able to truly set themselves up to gain a competitive advantage. At the end of the day, transformation doesn't happen because of technology. It's enabled through technology, but the business is where the change has to happen. So that's what we're going to talk about.
Yeah, and as you say, this is an inflection point. And really through technology over the last 30, 40 years, there's probably been a half a dozen critical inflection points. And I think many of us feel that this is the point right now. And I think you captured it well to say that how is this going to affect the businesses going forward?
100% right. And we have an opportunity, right? If you're a business leader out there, I would say that the time to watch is over. Your competitors are moving. The way that this technology works is there's an additive effect. So the sooner that you're able to get into it and you start to influence decision points throughout your organization through analytics and data, the more advantage you're going to be able to get in an aggregate fashion across your business. So time to start's now, and I think that's part of what I want to reinforce the dialogue that we're having.
Yeah, and we all know that the continuum from early adopters right through to laggards, and it feels like we're in the middle of that, maybe just a bit past the crest of it.
I would say we're past the crest of it, but when you start to look at companies that have leaned in, and you start to look at the data, you see an increase in total shareholder return across the board for those companies that are leading. I mean, it's more than 2x increase for those companies that are really leading in AI. You're also seeing greater productivity. I think the estimate now is on average around 40% increase in productivity. You're seeing greater customer engagement, greater loyalty. So there is a measured difference when you start to look. And that's not just companies adopting AI. What I'm talking about is the difference between those that are dipping their toe in the water and those that are doing laps.
Yeah, exactly. So what do you want the Analytics Summit attendees to take away from your talk?
I think what will be important for them to take away from the talk is a few things, one of which is I think it'll be important to have a foundational understanding of what AI is, not just from a technical perspective, but what it means from a business perspective. And at the highest level, I think it'll be important for them to understand that AI is really about using data to inform and activate decision points, that it is not a solution in itself, but it's an enabler that drives business outcomes. And I think it's really important to get a realistic view of how AI can start to have a true, meaningful bottom line value across the company. And one of the areas I was thinking about it last night that I've seen, in the analogy that I'll use, is I had a discussion with my doctor on Friday, annual physical, and we were talking. Clearly, you can see how my physical went. And we were talking a little bit about weightlifting and the benefit there. And I saw some analogies. So when you look at exercising and weightlifting, you don't see a return after a week. It's a little bit. You're tearing down muscle. It's rebuilding. But across 6 to 12 months, your body starts to change. If you're eating right, if you're exercising. I think one of the challenges that we've had with AI, and one of the myths, is because it seems magical, even though it's math, there's been an expectation in business that I put AI out there and I see an immediate material transformational bottom line impact, when in reality what it's about is influencing individual data points, whereas over time that becomes an additive benefit if you're tracking it, if you're measuring it, and you're doing it right. And what I've seen a lot of companies do is start and then throw up their arms and say, hey, I'm not seeing the value here. Is this worth investing in? Where other companies are continuing to lean in, have robust measures around it, and are seeing transformative bottom line value. And those are going to be the companies that are competing in the future and winning.
Yeah, and it's the old battleship analogy, right? That if you're dealing with, let's go back to your Kroger 8451 days. I mean, a couple of 100,000 employees. You can probably tell me the more accurate size, but
it's about 440.
Yeah,
thousand. Yep.
But turning that ship when you're dealing with upwards of $150 billion in revenue is enormous, and that's a perfect example of that.
The beauty there, it's also an environment, and this is something we'll talk about in the session, where you have high volume decisions. And you have the data to support it, or you can develop the data to support it. In a large company like that, small changes can make big differences. Yep. And we'll also talk a little bit about, too, say you don't have the kind of volumes that a $150 billion firm does. Where do you look to be able to get that kind of meaningful value that resonates and shows up on your bottom line? It depends on industries, but where you choose to start this process has a pretty big impact on how you start to see the value and the return.
So let's go to some specifics. So how do you see that industry leaders are using AI-driven analytics to gain a competitive edge? And do you have a good example that you've run across that you can demonstrate that encapsulates maybe some of that leaning in?
Yeah, here's what I would say. I think first and foremost, what I've seen most is within companies, I see pockets of excellence. You're not seeing a whole lot of companies that have it across the board. However, you are seeing some. And the company that comes to mind most often for me is Amazon. If you think about the diversity of their industries and how they are able to build on top of a cloud-based technology platform with an incredible data asset and robust analytics, they are the poster child for a digital-based business that is able to transform and create new business models. And I had an opportunity a few years ago, actually no, it was about a year ago. I went out to their most modern fulfillment facility at the time in San Diego. I was in retail, so you're in a lot of different fulfillment facilities. And this was a tremendous opportunity with Amazon. And if you just look at the amount of automation that they had in play and their ability to collect data, both for the use cases in the facility, but also for potential use cases outside, this is a company that is clearly thinking about data in everything they do. So that's an example of an organization. I think, there are other examples that I get excited about. So to get a little bit more granular, if, the carbon neutral market for products, to be able to do that right, you really need to be able to have an unbroken data thread all the way from the feed all the way to the time it goes on the shelf. And part of this is carbon credits, part of this is freshness, part of this is supply chain. But if you just think about, hey, I want a carbon neutral milk product, something that sounds very good, companies that are looking at that are looking very granular at how do I capture the data to be able to prove the chain of custody all the way throughout the entire production process for the ingredients that go in, so that I can truly demonstrate that this is carbon neutral product and I can claim the carbon credit. So we're seeing areas of industry shifting that are traditionally, you're talking dairy farms, you're talking feedstock, are becoming more and more automated and more data driven. So I think you're seeing it across the board. But there's we could talk for an hour about different examples. Maybe we'll spend some time at the offsite doing that.
Well, and the integration of supply chain, right? Be it them internal or external supply chains, right? Auto sector. There's been a lot of discussion over the last few months around the integration of auto sector between a fully integrated, vertically integrated auto sector, auto manufacturing, as opposed to ones that have specialty manufacturers outside that for parts. And that component of integrating through that whole supply chain is really critical for success.
100%. It what I would say is when you look at the supply chain and at a very high level, it brings predictability to flow, and it also gives you a better basis for prescriptive decision making when things change, and that's the power of an integrated supply chain.
So let's turn to obstacles, since we're sort of touching on some of that. So what do you see as the biggest obstacles that businesses are facing when integrating AI into their analytics strategy? And analytics and AI, you really can't separate them because they live in the same zone. But how can industry and companies overcome some of those obstacles?
Yeah, I would say first and foremost, don't try and integrate AI into your analytics strategy. Integrate your analytics and AI strategy into your business strategy. I think at the end of the day, one of the biggest obstacles that companies face is to treat AI as an end unto itself. And you see that. That was huge right after OpenAI announced their ChatGPT launch. I think in the first quarter of 2023, the tech giants alone said AI about 168 times in their earnings calls. And then you stop counting, right, across industry. So, I think there's been a lot of hype around this. And what's important for business leaders is don't lose track of business fundamentals. What are the challenges and problems that you're trying to solve? And what you're really looking for is if you can automate it, if it's deterministic, if it's automate it. We have that technology. We've had process improvement, Lean Six Sigma, since the 50s, right? That we've been implementing that throughout our industry. Deming, yeah, Duran, all of it. Yep. And so, the ability to, those tools are there. Now we have another tool, and that tool fits in the gap of, I have a person making judgment decisions, and the goal is to convert that to a prediction problem. And where you have data and where you have high volume, that is where you have an opportunity to apply this tool. So you start with the business problem, you look at and you figure out how AI can fit into it, but it's really about impacting, either improving or activating decision points through data and analytics. And if you keep that in mind, you're going to drive value. There's a lot we can talk about how do you track, how do you drive, how do you hold accountability for it. But the biggest misstep I've seen is AI for itself as an outcome, when really it is, we're having a business discussion. AI is an element of a solution, and it is embedded part of our strategy, being talked about by business leaders with support from your AI leadership and your data leadership, not the other way around.
Yeah, and there's such a broad spectrum of integration, or people, as you talked about, putting their toes in the water versus leaning in, right? And some people are really at that putting their toe in the water right now. And so if you're talking or advising a business leader at this point of a company that maybe hasn't quite leaned into it yet, what would you say the first steps they should take, and what are the common mistakes that they should avoid? You've touched on some of that, but maybe someone who really hasn't gone into it yet.
Yeah, for getting out of the gate, I think there are I see two problems, and there are two challenges that exist in the business marketplace right now, the broader marketplace. One is what you described. How do I get started? The other is, hey, I've gotten started, and I'm either not seeing value that I expected, or I don't know how to scale this. So back to your question around that first problem, everywhere I've worked and as I've looked across companies, I think the good news is there's a consistency to what works. And getting that initial project off the ground doesn't mean that you're going to be a successful transformative AI company, but you have to do it to start. I think the first thing is nothing happens if there is not top-down support. If the CEO and his or her team is not talking about this and on board and modeling, it's not going to happen. Because this is about transformation more than it's technology. Like if you ask me, it's 40% really hard technology, 60% organizational dynamics and change. So time with that leadership team, how you do that, we can talk about, but that needs to be there. The modeling and the buy-in and the messaging from top of the house. The second thing, pick a use case. Pick a leader that wants to take a risk. Find an area that has enough data to solve a problem that can be solved through an analytics. Back to that, are we going to inform or activate a decision point? I have the data to do it. And then put your head down and demonstrate that it works. Create a champion.
Yeah, and many folks that I talk to sometimes lean into the technology first, and they get enamored with what the latest release is, what the latest announcements are, the amount that the press is covering a specific element. But I think you touched on it, is that look for the business case and then apply the technology.
And I will add one more thing. Look for the business case, apply the technology, make sure you're measuring and capturing the value. The last point seems like, what company does a project and doesn't capture the value? But I talked to a lot of companies, and I went through this myself, where if you look at the co-pilot coding, the paired programming, you hear some out of Silicon Valley saying up to 70% efficiency. You hear other companies saying, I'm not seeing it in the budget. But if you measure it, and you're rigorous around what is the actual time that's being saved, using old operations management practices to do it, you can then apply that, identify it in the budget, and reapply it from the budget. That's what I did, and we saw a material efficiency that we were able to apply to growth. But if you don't measure it, it gets lost in the ether, and I think that's a big part of it.
And at one point, especially around your talk title of Unlocking Business Potential with AI, you talked about top-down leadership. Mm-hmm. And then you mentioned organizational change. I would say that certainly led by top-down leadership, but you have to have top-down leadership, next-level leadership, middle management leadership, and individual contributor contribution and buy-in if you're going to make this successful. Because any one of those levels can resist, right?
100%. And it's. Do you want to at the conference? Maybe we could team up, because I think you raised a great point. What I would say is you get the top down. I've had, and I give this example often when I speak about how do you know when you've made the turn and when you're getting the traction. And I'll give you two examples. One was from retail, my last organization. I was adamant that data science would go out and work in the stores. I went out and did it, which did two things for me. Gave me great insights into let me know if the data science component didn't work. I really wasn't good at what they did in the stores.
Yeah, working a cash register, yeah.
Yeah, I did a thing, and this poor lady looked at me and just said, I have to do it again. I mean, she was so disappointed in me, and I just felt horrible. But, we went out there, and it's interesting. We forced that kind of business intimacy. And I went out one day, and there was a business director and my vice president of data science, and I asked a technical question, and the business director answered it. Then I asked a business question, and my data science VP answered it. And I walked away saying, this is going to work. They're embedded with each other, and they get it. Another example from financial services was we were doing transaction processing changes, and I came down and I talked to the woman who was actually going to be impacted by it. They were involved in the project throughout, and that's important. And I asked her how it's going, and she said, Todd, I used to be a transaction processor, but now I own a microbot. I make it better, and it makes me better. Those are the kind of comments to get the buy-in, and when the people that are affected by the work, if you don't involve them, it's not going to work. They can opt out. And just do it.
And just like any organizational change, you need to find those champions, don't you?
You nailed it.
And inflection points, if I look back at...
And by the way, the champions aren't the ones that sit in the big buildings with the offices. They're on the ground level.
That's exactly right. And they're influencing their peers and colleagues. Right?
100%.
Exactly. The other part you mentioned there around barriers was data.
Yep.
And the role of data quality and governance is a big aspect here. AI is only as good as the data it's trained on, as we all know, right? What steps should organizations possibly consider to ensure high quality, reliable data that helps them progress with an AI strategy?
The first thing I am going to say is counter to probably everything that you're going to hear from others. The common conventional wisdom is make that big investment, get your data clean, get everything in place. The challenge I've had is no one's willing to make that investment until they see the value. I spent in financial services waiting about 24 months for technology to put a data platform together that was going to answer all our problems for data science. They got to a point, it wasn't done, and we realized that what the data scientists needed was different than what the technology group did. So what we did instead, line up your use cases, figure out that set of high-value use cases that has common data elements, and fix the data as you drive value. So kind of take that use case by use case approach to fixing the data is what I found worked in retail and works in financial services. It does two things. One, you got to fix the data one way or the other. And two, you're driving material economic benefit, which gives you the proof points to be able to request the investment that you're going to need to make those broader investments. Now, I've talked to private companies that say, look, we spent $3 billion on a data platform over the last few years. That is a tough thing to do in lower margin businesses and public companies.
Sure, especially in retail where you're dealing with splits of pennies.
Yep.
And if I can read into that, what you're really advocating is more of an agile approach as opposed to a waterfall approach.
100%.
Yeah, and those waterfall approaches of a huge multi-million-dollar projects that go into data organization can go on for a long time. And sometimes the people who are investing the money in that get weary. And they get weary as to, as you said, where's my return? And after 2 years of explaining to the CEO that, just trust me, it can get a bit tiring.
And I think too, you're going to talk to a lot of people. There is what would they say the average tenure for a chief data officer? I think is around 2 years. I think this is part of the reason why. If you're not showing value in a meaningful and material way within two years, it's very difficult not just to justify the project, but to justify the position.
Let's talk about different industries. You've touched on a few of them. Do you see different approaches across different industries and maybe sectors? So what are some of the key considerations that businesses should keep in mind when aligning their AI strategies to their specific industry?
I think there is a difference whether you're public or private. There's some common themes, right? Good business is good business no matter what your industry is. And I think there's difference across industries. Where I like to approach it, keep your eye on the P&L. Approach it from the P&L. There are certain industries, if you're looking for a big, meaningful material return, where if it's a larger margin business, going after customer engagement, increasing your revenue through greater engagement, greater sales, can be a very good place to start. There are other places where you may actually get a bigger lift if you are on paper-thin margins and you're looking at an EBITDA return to focus on productivity and streamlining your back-end processes. So I think, if you look at the P&L, it's going to tell you where to hunt. It's not just specific. You're going to see trends across industries and within industries, but what's more important, you're going to find out where you have those opportunities within your business. Where do you have, goes back to those big pocket of high volume judgment decisions that you can influence and enhance through data and analytics. That's what you're looking for in your P&L. And so that's somewhat company specific, but you do find general trends from an industry to industry perspective.
And that's exactly what I was where I was going to go on that, is that if you look across industries, be it healthcare, retail, manufacturing, there are some, besides the specific companies within an industry, from early adopters to laggards, there's entire industries that are, and especially in something like a manufacturing that can't necessarily pivot, right? Because they have huge investments of production lines that they have to possibly incorporate. Or in healthcare, where they have to worry about risk of patient outcomes, right? And I think that plays into it as well.
Yeah, there's a regulatory landscape that I think you're alluding to that plays pretty big within there. What I would say though, the magnitude and the opportunity. You work in a regulatory environment. I came from financial services. I've worked in healthcare. The rules are different, but the people in that space also have an understanding how to optimize within that regulatory regime too. So I would push back, I wouldn't use it as an opportunity to say our industry isn't going to be as disrupted because of regulatory barriers. I think it's going to be disrupted in different ways. The other thing that I would say too is there are areas too where the nature of their offering creates, they're new offerings that wouldn't have existed without AI.
Oh, and new offerings that come out every month. My goodness.
Every month. And so I think that we haven't talked much about the monetization components of data and analytic products, but that is another huge opportunity for people to unlock new markets that they aren't currently looking at. And I think that'll take, we saw a progression where you would go from, you create a washing machine to now you have a service offering model around a washing machine that doesn't make a lot of money. At some point, you're going to have a platform of data that's thrown off from a particular industry like washing machine that you're able to monetize on top of that too. And we're seeing that across industries, heavily in retail. You look at 8451 and what they do from a data monetization point of view within the grocery retail industry. We're going to see more and more of that across different industries as existing services, existing offerings increasingly become commoditized through competition, and people are going to be looking for new ways in which to grab yield.
And certainly service industries can pivot a lot faster because of ways of work, right? You're not dealing with a whole lot. You can literally write a memo, change your way of work, install something, get your data organized, and be fairly quick in your pivot. In organization.
But even your industrial example, while it is tougher to back out of capital decisions, the ability to optimize on top of that. And what I was also seeing is when you go in, and I think when you go into a manufacturing, when you go into a supply chain environment, there's an opportunity to optimize from a science perspective, but I'm also finding it's a tool for changing some of the processes. What are the legacy rules that have been in place, and how can we begin to revisit them? So I think it's very important, too, that, as part of being business-led, you don't just stop with the technology solution. You use the fact that you're bringing in AI as an opportunity to even rethink some of the existing rules, the existing ways of working, and drive change there, I think is going to be very important for business. So AI is an enabler, but it's also a driver of change if you use it in the right way because it's disruptive enough that it gives you that cover, that opportunity to make broader changes.
There's an area we haven't touched on, and that's ethics and bias.
Yep.
And the ethical and responsibility of AI in business. With AI playing a larger role in these decision makings we've touched on throughout the discussion here, how should businesses approach ethical AI practices, including bias mitigation and transparency?
Yeah, there's several classes I think that we see out there. We see organizations that aren't being responsible enough. We see organizations that are implementing good frameworks, and we see organizations that I think are taking an ideological bent. What I would say is when you look out there, I think it's very important that as you implement these solutions, we keep in mind that we want to create a world that we all want to live in, that we want our AI to reflect our individual and collective desires for this world and our individual and collective principles around which we want to live. As you look out there, I think the standards for safe, transparent, responsible, unbiased AI, we're all using the same frameworks. I mean, it comes down to, are we trying to create an environment where we treat people consistently, fairly, safely, decently? You put the person at the center of that, I think is very important. Where I do see missteps is when ideology comes into play. And you can say, where's he going with this? Pick your ideology. I don't care if it's left, right, center, up, down. Once you start putting an ideological bent, you end up with cases of feeling good while doing evil. And we've seen some examples of that where, and it wasn't necessarily AI, it was rules-based sitting on top of AI that created situations where certain demographic groups were associated with atrocities they've never been part of. Family units were represented in ways that biased against certain lifestyles. That was done with good intent, but the outcome was negative, and that's why I say stay away from ideology. The other example, too, I think we're sitting here in Cincinnati, Ohio today. I think it is very important that we get the broadest cross-section of input on what AI ethics should look like. It should not be defined out of the Silicon Valley. It should not be defined out of Seattle. It should not be defined out of Cincinnati, Ohio. Mm-hmm. It should be represented as a cross-section, a give and take, a tug and pull from Texas to Boston to Wichita to San Francisco, and you can think globally. I think we need to make sure that we're being inclusive, and that'll put us on the right path. So that's kind of my warning. I think a lot of companies are doing this well. There's a lot of good grounding out there, good frameworks. It's being built into tools. If you're not watching out for it, you're going to get in trouble. But I think from a philosophical point of view, we still have some risk factors that we as practitioners in this field, and quite frankly as a society at large, need to manage.
Yeah, and especially when you talk about large language models that have a lot of different influences.
100%.
And more companies that I talk to are really considering small language models. And
there's a lot of reasons to do that, by the way.
And
yes.
it can go both ways too,
yeah.
right? It can go the way of large language models have a bit of crowdsourcing, which is nice as long as you trust them. But small language models have the within my boundaries and security, firewalls, all of that.
Yeah, and I think there are cost reasons and other reasons why you want to look at it. I think to that point, one model doesn't fit
right.
everything. But to your point, though, I do think taking a little bit more control there. And the other thing I talk about, too, is it's important to keep in mind context. Sometimes being too careful can get companies in trouble. A few years ago, there was a Massachusetts company that doing the right thing. Hey, we don't want gender or race involved, which we all sit back and say, that's great. Treat all people equal. Take factors that can't be controlled out. There is a context lever that I think is going to be very important for us as we think about responsible AI and the use of data as well.
So let's put our eyes above the horizon. Future of AI-powered analytics. Looking ahead, how do you see AI evolving in the next few years, and what emerging trends should business leaders be aware of as they look trying to stay ahead?
Yeah, I think there's a few things that I would say. I do think we are going to continue to see an increased penetration of AI capabilities built into platforms and being used by companies. I think companies are in two races right now, whether they realize it or not, as it comes to AI. One is kind of the vendor race, getting to the new normal. All this AI that is going to be a commodity capability that is consistent across industries and within industries, there is a race to get to that, to change your cost structure and to change your capability mix. But it's not differentiating. It's just to the next normal. The other area that I think companies are going to be recognizing that and moving. The other area that I see is what I call the differentiation race. And this is where companies that are going to get ahead are really going to have to start to look. There are three things that they're going to need to manage. One is, do you have a robust proprietary data asset? Two, do you have sciences or access to data sciences to employ it? That used to be the most important. I think over the next few years, it'll be the least important. The third, no one talks about, that I think will be the most important, is do you have the muscle and the muscle memory to be able to operationalize these changes in a way that has a meaningful impact on your business? And I think that's going to be the mindset shift that we're going to see across companies as they look to restructure their platforms, their operations. And when I say operations, their operating models. The other big kind of out there change that surprise, I think will be a bit of a surprise, mobility. We saw the rapid change of large language models. We're going to continue to see an acceleration there. And those sciences are going to drive the most value when combined with optimization science. So I look across a process. How do I take a predictive science and combine it with some of these large language capabilities to really create a solution that is simple, easy, and drives big value for a customer or for an employee? But the area that I think and I was up at MIT probably 3 years ago talking to one of the professors who's leading in the fields, and he was talking about how difficult the mobility problem is for AI versus the language problem. Working in different dimensions, you don't have to deal with that in language prediction. So these mobility model concepts are actually getting more traction than I think a lot of us expected. And I think we're going to start to, like if you look out across the next 5 years, I think we're going to have an equally big moment with mobility that we had with language models. So, and that's not something I had on my card happening as quick as the time frame I discussed.
Yeah, and it's just like anything. It's if you start to look at trying to predict what's going to happen over the next 5 years, you're going to be absolutely wrong, no matter what you predict.
100%. Yeah. What do they say? It always takes longer over. It seems to go slow over the 3-year period, but over the 5 to 10 year period, you're shocked by how quick it goes. So, I think we're living in that world. I mean, the other thing, and you nailed it, the pace of change. That continues to accelerate to levels that I don't think any of us have seen in our career. And I think probably the new normal is however fast it went last year, expected to be faster next year.
Yeah, and it's we have you in the track around industry alignment, but there's other tracks I think that are going to play into this as too. We have a data foundations track that people we're going to hear a couple of stories around. Home City Ice is coming and talking with Amend and talking about their journey around data. We have Newton Technology, a couple of companies in there talking about where they're emerging and how they're bringing AI agents into their technologies. And one of the other interesting ones is how you touched on AI and analytics and that relationship, and what that relationship looks going forward, especially as you look at something around AI and analytics in prediction of the next Gen AI models are analytics, and so I think it'll be a really interesting conference for a lot of different people. But is there anything you would suggest to the people that are coming?
I think the first thing is I think this is an incredible asset for the community. The University of Cincinnati anchoring this conference, bringing together university, bringing together business, bringing together the community, I think is very important for the technology ecosystem. The two big benefits I always get out of this is dedicate the time to set aside to really listen. You're going to hear the business challenges. Now, you're going to hear the technology advancement, but you're also going to hear the challenges and the applications of these technologies across industries. There is a lot of opportunity to see what someone else is doing to pull it into your own business. And I always am pleasantly surprised, and I find some of my best ideas for the solutions I want to do in my own industry from hearing from someone that's in a totally different industry.
Cross industry.
So you change it. The other thing, network. Man, this is going to be a lot of people with a lot of different backgrounds talk to each other.
And well, thank you very much for your time today. I wish we could go on for another hour.
Hey, this has been a pleasure, and I'm looking forward to the event, and it's great to be here at the University of Cincinnati today.
My thanks to Tim Cholvat and Todd James for taking over this episode of Bearcats Mean Business. Remember, the 2025 Analytics Summit will be held Tuesday, May 6th at the Sharonville Convention Center. For more information, visit business.uc.edu/analytics-summit. Thanks for tuning in. Go Bearcats!